What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today I think it's time. I'm gonna get the BMW 700 up into the air and start looking at what I can do to get the single port out of this thing and get the dual port in it. What I want to do first, and I mentioned this in the last episode, is I want to get the exhaust off the 1500 first, because that's what my dad and I custom built for this car. More notably, my father kind of took the reins on that, as he's done lots of custom exhaust work over the years. We built kind of an intricate exhaust system for this car, and I want to make sure it's going to fit on this 1600. Everything I've found on the internet says it should, but before I start pulling things out and doing more work than I should, I want to make sure that that exhaust will bolt up to the 1600. In the last couple of episodes, you've seen me work on this dual port 1600. I got the South American Puma shroud on it, which is much lower rise than the stock shrouds, and got the 90 amp, 100 amp, I believe, 100 amp alternator on it, which I had on the 1500 in the 700 to basically withstand the draw of the air compressor for the air suspension in that. I think it's pretty much ready to go in. I did a valve adjustment on it. I think it's good to go. Cap looks good, rotor looks good, belt's good. I have no reason to believe the coil's bad. My friend Kyle drove the thing that this motor was in, said the clutch felt good, so I'm not gonna mess with the clutch. But here's where things might get a little crazy. When my father and I built this BMW 700, we body dropped it down over a beetle pan that we shortened by over a foot. And when we did that, we built a frame inside the body. We had to basically build a full, well, not a full, but we built a tubular chassis inside the body to give the body rigidity, but to also meet the body mount locations on the pan. Now, when we set that down and built all of that, the motor was attached to the transmission. So when we set the body down and built in our frame, the motor was already in here. So I have not taken this motor out with this body down over the pan. So I don't know if I'm gonna hit some serious snags. My concern is, I'm hoping I can pull the motor back enough to pull it off of the transmission and be able to drop it down or lift the body up over it. So that's another wild card. That's a bridge I've not crossed yet. This motor has not been out since the BMW body got put down over it. Now the body is still technically removable, but not as easily as a Beetle body. We seam sealed a lot of things with sound deadening and weatherproofing. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that would have to get cut away to basically lift the body up. We even went as far as making a quick disconnect for the wiring harness that goes from the body to the chassis and back to the motor. So even the wiring harnesses can be unclipped and the body can be raised, but it's not easy, and it'll be far more work than just dropping the motor out. I'm gonna put a battery in it, charge the air system, air it up, get it up on the lift, and get this exhaust off, and pray that that exhaust works on the 1600, and we'll be off to the races. For those of you who haven't been a part of the channel long and haven't seen me do much of this stuff with the 700, this is a 1960 German market 700 Sport Coupe. So it's quite a rare car. It's a first year 700. I think technically they might have said they did them in 59, but this is an early model German market sport coupe. So this had twin carburetors on it from the factory. So this was a pretty desirable 700. But now it's on a Beetle pan, as you could probably tell if you know what you're looking at with Volkswagen Beetles. Custom steering column. You can see how far back away from the dash it sits, since where the pedal cluster mounts on the Beetle pan in relation to the dashboard on the 700. You'd be scrunched right up against the pedals if you were to be sitting in it normally. So custom seats. This is where we shortened the pan by over a foot, and I've laser cut and laser engraved this custom airlift control stand that is adjustable. So yeah, it's a fun little car. I did a bunch of custom laser cutting and laser engraving in this car. I custom made the center horn button on the steering wheel. This is a Beetle steering wheel that I cut the horn ring away from and kind of cleaned everything up to make it look a little bit more not Volkswagen Beetle, and then custom made this vintage BMW logo out of laser cut and laser engraved acrylic. So back here, you get a look at the exhaust we built. And I'm hoping that this J-pipe right here off the 1500 will clear, that this actual J in the bend has enough sweep and drop to clear the heads on the 1600. So this is basically what we did. Cylinder 1 is a J-pipe that was pre-bent. And that J-pipe comes to a clamp to the exhaust system that we started the build off of. Cylinder 2 comes out up there and comes over the top, and 1 and 2 accumulate right here. And then they go down and meet up right here, which this is kind of acting as an accumulator. So cylinder 3 and 4 come out and accumulate right here. Now I know my father, I know he's gonna be like, don't show that thing off, it's ugly. But what I had for an idea for an exhaust, he executed perfectly. And the tone I wanted out of this motor was exactly what I was hoping for. So as you see here, 3 and 4 meet where 1 and 2 come down into this accumulator. And then it passes through this cherry bomb muffler, and out the back of the muffler, it bends up and around cylinder 1 and makes this 180-degree bend and goes down this long tailpipe in line with the rear bumper, just under it, to a 90-degree exit. And there's not a lot of space in there. It's tight. And we weren't working with pie cut. We basically had his hydraulic bender, and we'd just be making bends, cuts, bends, and cuts, and MIG welding everything together. And the idea of this was, my friend Robert from England has a Hillman Imp on air, and it's one of my favorite cars. The thing's incredible. But he has this really cool exhaust system where the tailpipe runs along the bottom of the rear bumper the width of the car. And I love the look of it. That car was the inspiration for this exhaust, essentially. But the other thing I wanted to hopefully acquire or achieve with this exhaust system was a longer system to allow the sound waves to bounce farther and farther apart from each other, therefore deepening the tone. I've gotten spoiled with the Corvair being a flat 6-cylinder with dual exhaust, with dual glass packs. It's got a real low, kind of rumbly sound. It's got a real aggressive low sound. And in comparison, I've always hated the sound of the Volkswagen Beetles, that whistly 4-cylinder sound. It hasn't really done anything for me. So in the 700, I was really hoping we could achieve a longer exhaust system to allow those sound waves to kind of relax a little bit and not come out so tense and so high pitched. And I think we acquired it. This thing sounds like no other Beetle I've heard before because of how long the exhaust system is. So that is essentially why I want to make sure this exhaust system will bolt up to that 1600. All right, well, I got the J-pipes off and have verified that it will work on the 1600. So now that I've got a pretty good idea that this exhaust will work on this motor, as more than likely the bottom end is all the same between the two motors, I'm gonna bring the car back down and be able to unhook the rest of the exhaust system. All right, guys, so the exhaust is out. You get a little bit better of a look as to how we kind of planned this thing out and to make it as long as we could. So I think perhaps what I'll do next is I'll just work on pulling the 1500 out of the BMW. Since I don't have a traditional engine stand here in the shop, it's going to be difficult to get the exhaust mounted up to the 1600 while it's sitting on that motorcycle jack. So I think what I'll do is I'll get the 1500 out and we'll just go for it. Well, the 1500 is out, and luckily didn't hit any snags trying to get it out of the engine bay of the 700. Because as I mentioned before, that motor hasn't been off that transmission since the 700 body was put down. All right, well, I tore the top end back down off the 1600, took the Puma shroud, alternator, coil, all that off. So when I get it into the engine bay of the 700, I can gain access to my upper motor mount bolts, or my upper engine bolts. So I think it's ready to get mated up. All right, so what you guys haven't seen on camera is the fight for the top left motor mount bolt. So the difference here is, you'll notice on the 1500, this motor mount bolt casing hole is just a hole. But on the 1600, it's got an added casing that's threaded right there. And normally, that'd be fine. You just thread the bolt through rather than pass it through and put a nut on the backside. But the problem is, and we can show you right here on this other transmission, is there's a step right here that this sits against to keep it from turning. So that passes in, and it sits just like that. So now the problem I'm having is the motor's threaded, which means this needs to turn, and once it gets to where that casing dimple is, it keeps it from turning anymore, which means the bolt isn't tight. This motor would mate up to that transmission just fine, because this would pass through, lock in against the casing on the transmission, and get a nut on the backside. But this late 1600 has that threaded part on the actual flange of the motor. So I'm kind of brainstorming what I'm going to do next, and we'll be back shortly. All right, well, I sorted out a solution. There's a few different ways I could have gone about this, but what I did was, since the split case is magnesium on the transmission, it was real easy to kind of mill away the casing step that the bolt with the flathead on it would sit against. So I kind of got rid of that so I could get an actual bolt with a hex head on it to pass in from the back and be able to turn and not hit that step in the casing. And I cut away a little bit of that added casing on the block end that was threaded, and was able to thread that bolt through and put a nut on the back side of it to essentially lock it into place. So we're good there. That's in now. Gonna finish dressing it, put the tin work on, and we're that much closer to getting this thing started. Turns out this motor, or the fan shroud and intake manifold, sit back a little bit farther than the 1500 did, which made hooking everything up inside the 700 engine bay pretty difficult, including the exhaust system, since that was basically touching the bumper. So I had to make a few modifications. Excluding the rat's nest of wires right now, I haven't loomed everything and tucked everything up. I basically just wanted to hear the thing run, because the reason why I'm kind of expediting hooking it up and wanting to run it at the end of this episode is because everything on top sits back just a little bit. My throttle cable won't reach the carburetor. The beetle pan this car is on, as I mentioned previously, is over a foot shorter than the normal wheelbase. So when I put my original throttle cable in when we finished the car, it was far longer than it needed to be. And I trimmed it when I got it set up in the Solex on the single port motor. Now that this sits back just a little bit, I can't quite grab the carburetor. So since I've got to order one and I'm leaving for Florida for Eurotripper in the next couple of days, I'm not going to be able to finish this episode before I leave for Florida, where I'll be filming another couple of episodes, with this completely done. So what we're going to do now is cross our fingers, because I've never heard this motor run, is I've got everything hooked up, and I'm going to prime the carburetor, get that fuel ball filled, and turn it over and see what happens. Basically, I just want to hear this thing run, and that's going to be a victory if it runs inside this car. Throttle cable, I'll be able to sort out later in a following episode. That episode will be getting it running and driving under its own power and taking the thing for a drive with the dual port. So for now, we're going to see if the thing runs. All right, let's see if she starts. Cross your fingers. Come on. We got fuel to the carburetor. Fuel filter's got fuel in it. It's tough that I can't operate the throttle from inside the car while I'm trying to crank it over. Yes! Yes, that is exactly what I was hoping for. Awesome. Needs some tinkering, but it runs. Throttle response is good. Accelerator pump seems to be working on the carburetor okay. Dummy light on the alternator went out when I idled it up enough to where it was charging, so that's hooked up correctly, as it all should. I mean, basically, it's received the same motor, essentially. But hearing this thing breathe life inside the 700 is awesome. And now I'm really bumming I don't have a throttle cable long enough to hook this thing up, because now I want to drive it. Well, guys, I'm so stoked that this thing runs. It's in the 700. Lots of tidying up and detail work to do. Still have to tune it a little bit. This is the next morning, and I just got it running, and I think it might be out of time, or it might need a carb adjustment. It's not running quite as well as it was last night. But I'm going to focus on all of that when I get back from Eurotripper, leaving tomorrow for Fort Myers, Florida. So this will be on hold until I get back. So for now, just so stoked that this is in the car. It fits, turnkey, it starts, it runs. I'm really excited to dial this thing in more, get it tuned, and get you guys down the road with me in this thing. I'm really looking forward to driving it. I haven't driven it in what seems like forever, and to hopefully feel a big difference between the single port motor and this dual port, which I'm sure I will. For now, it's time to get ready for Eurotripper. It's about a 10 to 12 hour drive down to Fort Myers. Really looking forward to seeing some of you guys down there. It's the 10th anniversary of the show. It's one of my favorite of the year. Next week, we'll hopefully be getting a couple more episodes done on the 700 and be driving it, working out some of the kinks before I fly to California the week after to work on a couple really cool projects at my friend Sutton Morris's shop in Northern California. More on that soon. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys so much for all of the support. We'll see you in the next episode.